Hi everyone and welcome to online story time. I am not one of the three little pigs, but my name is Mr. F, and my teacher friends and I are super excited because we're going to be reading to all you people at home for the next couple of weeks, and we can't wait. So I'll take off the little pig hat for now and reveal a very warm Mr. F. I'd like to say a big shout out to all the children that I've taught who I know are watching, and for all the children who I haven't met yet and are tuning in for the first time, you are very welcome. Sit back, relax and enjoy the stories. What you might see somewhere on my chair and on the table next to me are a couple of chocolate bunnies. And those chocolate bunnies are positioned around me to give you a clue about what our first story might be. Now, I know some of you have messaged me already, so you know what the story is. I'll give you another clue. I like to eat this particular thing, which is related to the story, for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner, and for a midnight snack. Have you guessed it? It's chocolate, which is why we've got the chocolate bunnies here. And the reason why that links very neatly into our first story, which we're going to read for the first couple of weeks, is because our first story is one of my favourite stories of all time, and certainly one of the most popular and well-known children's stories that has been read all around the world, and that is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, written by one of the greatest children's authors of all time, Mr. Roald Dahl. So, without further ado, let's get reading. So if you've got your Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book, what I want you to do is open the book. Have a smell. This is a new book. New books always smell great. It's a sign of good things to come. And we're going to open the book, and at the start of the book, like most fiction books, we have a number of chapters which tell us what's going to happen throughout the story. And as is routine, we're going to start with chapter number 1. And the first chapter, and I'll try and show you some of the pictures as we go through this as well, is called Here Comes Charlie. These two very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. This is where we get to meet some of the characters. And these two very old people are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. This is Mr. Bucket. This is Mrs. Bucket. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again? He is very pleased to meet you. The whole of this family, the 6 grown-ups, count them if you can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, the 6. Okay. And little Charlie Bucket live together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town. Wow, lots of adults and children crammed in together. Sounds very familiar to our sort of scenario at the moment. The house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for them all. There were only 2 rooms in the place altogether, and there was only 1 bed. The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so tired, they never got out of it. Sound like your parents? Grandma Joe and Grandma Josephine on this side, and Grandma George and Grandma Georgina on this side. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket and little Charlie Bucket slept in the other room upon mattresses on the floor. Wow! In the summertime, this wasn't too bad, but in the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house, or even one more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a toothpaste factory where he sat all day long at a bench and screwed the little caps tubes on top of the lids. But a toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money, and poor Mr. Bucket, however hard he worked and however fast he screwed on the caps, was never able to make enough to buy 1/2 of the things that so large a family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Sundays were a little bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had exactly the same, everyone was allowed a second helping. The Buckets, of course, didn't starve, but every one of them, the 2 old grandfathers, the 2 old grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible, empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all, and although his father and mother often went without their own share of lunch or supper so they could give it to him, it still wasn't nearly enough for a grown boy. He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. The one thing he longed for more than anything else, there's an ellipsis written here for dramatic pause, was chocolate. Walking to school in the mornings, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled up high in the shop windows, and he would stop and stare and press his nose against the glass, his mouth watering like mad. Many times a day, he would see other children taking bars of creamy chocolate out of their pockets and munching them greedily. And that, of course, was pure torture. Is this making you hungry? Only once a year, on his birthday, did Charlie Bucket ever get to taste a bit of chocolate. The whole family served up their money for that special occasion, and when the great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with one small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it, on those marvellous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned and treasure it as it were though a bar of solid gold. And for the next few days, he would allow himself only to look at it, but never to touch it. Then, at last, when he could stand it no longer, he would peel back a tiny bit of the paper wrapping at one corner to expose a tiny, written in an italic font, tiny bit of chocolate. And then he would take a tiny nibble, just enough to allow the lovely sweet taste to spread out slowly over his tongue. The next day he would take another tiny nibble, and so on and so on. And in this way, Charlie would make his 6-penny bar of birthday chocolate last him for more than a month. I can't see this lasting for more than the next hour. But I haven't told you yet about the one awful thing that tortured little Charlie, the lover of chocolate, more than anything else. This thing, for him, was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop windows, or watching other children munching bars of creamy chocolate right in front of him. It was the most terrible, torturing thing, alliteration, you could imagine. And it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of his house where they lived, there was, and this is written in capital letters to tell us that this piece of information is important. There was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous, owned by a man called Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there had ever been. And what a tremendous, marvellous place it was! Exclamation mark. It had huge iron gates leading into it, and a high wall surrounding it, and smoke belching from its chimneys, and strange whizzing sounds coming from deep inside. And outside the walls, for half a mile around in every direction, the air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Twice a day, on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly. And he would hold his nose high in the air, wow, and take long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous chocolatey smell all around him. Everybody do that. Can you smell that chocolate? Oh, how he loved that smell. And oh, how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like.